video, I explored the early married life of James Thompson of Primrose Mill and his wife Cecilia, who's the daughter of Thomas Starkey, the vicar of Blackburn. So it seemed logical to pick their story up again shortly afterwards, the point where we're starting to move forward in time from the Regency period and into the reign of George IV, who was king from 1820 to his death in 1830. And in fact, at that time was published Baines Directory and Gazetteer of Lancaster in 1824, which is excellent. My faithful Baines Directory offers a few hints that the Industrial Revolution, and more specifically the cotton industry, had most definitely reached Clitheroe by the time George became Prince Regent back in February of 1811. Here's what Baines has to say. Formerly, this was a place of little trade, but within the last 20 years, the cotton manufacture has been gaining ground yearly, and is now carried on to a considerable extent. There are also two extensive print works in the neighbourhood, the one at Primrose belonging to Messrs Thompson, Chippendale and Company, and the other at Pendle Hill belonging to Messrs James and John Berry and Company. And when we actually look at the list of traders in the town, we find these extracts which seem very relevant. Time went on. Mr Burton and Mr Chippendale retired, each, by all accounts, with very considerable fortunes, leaving James Thompson in sole charge of Primrose Mill. And I've found all sorts of newspaper reminiscences that were printed quite a while after his death that make it really clear what an enterprising man he was. He had a worldwide reputation for the great perfection to which he carried the art of block printing. So now we're getting some details about the technical side of work at Primrose Mill, and other kinds of printing. Mr Thompson secured the aid of the most eminent scientific talent from wherever he could obtain it, amongst whom Dr Lyon Playfair could be mentioned. Lyon Playfair was a personality in his own right. He was born in 1818 in Bengal, in India, where his father was the Scottish Inspector General of Hospitals, so he was off to a good start. But Lyon and his siblings were actually raised in Scotland. They were sent home to Britain, effectively, and raised in their father's homeland. Lyon studied at St Andrews in Scotland, and later went on to further education in Germany. He gained a doctorate, and by the early 1840s he was assisting at Primrose Mill. That wasn't the end of his story. He went on to become, amongst other things, a professor of chemistry in the Royal Institution at Manchester, and he was Special Commissioner to the first international exhibition in 1851. He was even a gentleman usher to Prince Albert, consort of Queen Victoria. So clearly, James Thompson really knew how to choose an advisor. He'd got the cream of the crop here. He also knew a fair bit about the concept of copyright and claiming the right to have his inventions and techniques recognised. In March 1813, a month before his daughter Cecilia was born, James Thompson was granted a patent for a method of producing patterns on cloth, previously dyed turkey red and made of cotton, linen or both, and the patent expired 14 years later in or about March of 1827, which is an interesting time to move on to other aspects of work at Mill, because a few weeks after the patent expired, James Thompson was having other problems with his printed fabric, and these had absolutely nothing to do with the dyeing process. Not long after James Thompson's patent for printing patterns on that turkey red cloth expired, a daring and almost certainly premeditated scheme was being planned under his very nose. So who were the culprits? 3 of his own workforce. And this story must have really caught the imagination, probably of industrialists as well as the generally shocked public. It was reported in newspapers in London, Bath, in Cumberland, which we now call Cumbria, and even in Belfast, in what is now Northern Ireland. At the Preston sessions on Thursday week, so this went to court, Edward Baxter, Thomas Ribchester and Lawrence Boothman, 3 men in the employ of Thompson, Chippendale and Company of Clitheroe, were indicted for stealing a quantity of patterns of printed calico, which, they stress, was the property of their employers. Baxter was a clerk, Boothman and Ribchester were colour mixers, so they must have been quite hands-on with the dyeing and printing process. They had availed themselves of the facilities which their situations afforded, I bet they had, to purloin a vast number of patterns from the works. And these were inserted in pattern books. Each was accompanied by a full description of the mode employed by Messrs Thompson, Chippendale and Company to mix the colours. Effectively, they are stealing all the details that relate to their employer's process of manufacture, which may have effectively been quite unique and effectively copyrighted to Thompson and Chippendale and Company. So what were they actually trying to do? What were they hoping to achieve? Have they got money? Are they able to set up their own cotton printing press? Now we find out. The object of the prisoners appears to have been to emigrate to America with the patterns and the information they have obtained. They thought they were never going to get caught. All were found guilty. The court sentenced them to 7 years transportation. This is the point in history where people were still being transported overseas. And this is not an opportunistic crime. Edward Baxter, Thomas Ribchester and Lawrence Boothman are clearly trying to take those patterns. They're planning to start a new life in a new country. Probably they were going to set themselves up as the firm of Baxter, Ribchester and Boothman for all we know. And because they were transported, it is possible to learn more about them. Now we get to look at a really interesting resource. The big genealogy websites have all sorts of weird and wonderful record collections, and in a lot of cases you will find things relating to emigration, passenger lists, shipping lists, and most relevant of all in this case, transportation. And in fact I have found, using the genealogist website, the quarterly returns of prisoners who were kept on the convict hulks. They were basically like big floating prisons, usually in London on the Thames. People were transported there from all across the country, and every now and again when they've got a ship full, that's when they seem to sail. They're not going to go all the way to America or Australia, particularly Australia, with a half full ship. What's the point in that? You just pack them all in and send them off when it's full. And these quarterly returns of prisoners in the convict hulks for September 1827 are where we start finding the name Baxter, Edward Baxter. He is described as 26 years old at this point. His offence, stealing printers' patterns, so that matches exactly. We've got the right man here. He's sentenced to 7 years. His behaviour is good. His bodily state healthy. And I continued to be able to find records for Edward all the way up to June of 1831. His behaviour is very good at this point, and his bodily state still healthy. But in this case, this is 4 years after we first find him, and his age is still 26, but all the other information relating to his crime suggests that he is the man who was employed by Thompson, Chippendale and Company. So you might be noticing already a really common problem with historical research. Edward Baxter has got the key to eternal youth. His age remains static over 4 years. And the fact of it is he probably wasn't actually sure how old he really was. He may not have been carrying a copy of his baptism certificate around in his pocket. So the key detail that helps me to be sure that it is him is the fact that his trial date and location of the trial is stated in every record, consistently given as Preston, the conviction date the 25th of April 1827. Clearly he was held on these prison hulks for some time, and I don't know what happened to him after June 1831. Maybe he did go to Australia, maybe he changed his name for a fresh start, who knows. He's a bit of a mystery. So what about the other two? Boothman and Ribchester. They too appear in the records for these convict hulks. In this case, for September of 1827, we find Lawrence Boothman, age 29, stealing printers' patterns, 7 years transportation. His behaviour is good, his bodily state healthy. Much the same can be said for Thomas Ribchester. His record there is completely identical, except that he is only 23 years old. And we continue to find him as far forward as 1827, the returns for December for these hulks, and it is noted at this point that Boothman, Lawrence Boothman, was transported to Bermuda on the 21st of October 1827, so that was when he sailed. He'd actually already gone by December. Thomas Ribchester was transported just a couple of days later, 23rd of October 1827. So, using a few other tools, namely the Convict Records website, which is a really good one, that you can search by surname, ship. You can even contribute other information of your own if you know any details of the crimes convicted by any of these transported criminals. From that website I learnt that Thomas Ribchester did sail on the Hooghley to New South Wales on the 31st of October 1827, so this is not long after he said to have been transported. As for Lawrence Boothman, well, he was supposed to have gone to Bermuda, but I don't think he ever made it. I went back to the Convict Hulks records on the genealogist's website, and I realised that come the end of 1831, Lawrence Boothman is still there. By December of 1831, in fact, a notice saying that he's discharged to the York Hulk in Portsmouth, so he's moved to another ship. On the 19th of October 1831, he's now described as an invalid. We move forward 3 months to March 1832. Lawrence Boothman, who has now lost a few more years. He is now only 25 years old, so that could easily be a clerical error. No comment is made at all under bodily state or behaviour. Under remarks, we simply find out he died on the 28th of January 1832. So he probably wasn't all that old. And from this, we can establish the following dates of birth. I haven't found anything concrete to say whether or not these men were from Clitheroe, but maybe you recognise them, and if you do recognise them, I would love to know. Certainly Thomas Ribchester arrived in New South Wales as a young man, fairly young man, 23 or so. What's to say that he didn't go free after his 7 years? I'm sure he didn't come back to England. He may well have married, he may have started a family, maybe some of his descendants are still out there. And what on earth happened to Edward Baxter? If you know the answer to that, if you are a descendant of Thomas Ribchester or Edward Baxter, then please get in touch, because I would love to know what happened to them. Now there's a question that needs to be answered. James Thompson isn't having a lot of luck here, is he? His problems were not just confined to difficulties at work. Long after he died, the Preston Chronicle printed an extract from Supplementary Recollections of Clitheroe and the Neighbourhood. The mysterious author was known only as an old East Lancashire man. And these recollections start off by telling us that the newer burial ground at Clitheroe Parish Church, St Mary Magdalene's, was then known as School Croft, the reason being simply that that was where the original Clitheroe Grammar School was built. But once the new school was built on York Street, Schoolcroft Cottage was rented by a talented group of theatricals called Cooper's Company. So they're putting it to good use, hopefully. And it's not exactly clear whether or not James Thompson hosted the actors at Primrose, or whether he just went out a lot and spent a lot of time at the theatre and didn't seem to have much free time for his family. Maybe he didn't actually bother to take his family with him to the theatre. But either way, apparently it caused a great deal of tension in his marriage, to the point where he and Cecilia separated. That's pretty groundbreaking. But why had this happened? What on earth had driven either James, or probably more likely Cecilia, to insist on a separation? Perhaps there's actually a clue in a newspaper report. It's a very, very subtle one, but very, very telling. A parting of a painful character ensued between James and Cecilia, in which the butler, Stephen Embley, acted a conspicuous part. While long in the service of Mr. Thompson, Stephen was enabled to put by a fortune, which enabled him to spend his declining years in ease and affluence. And no wonder, for Stephen had only one idea, and that was to gather gear by every while. Have they got a burglar under their roof? You could interpret this report in a number of different ways, particularly the mention of the separation between James and Cecilia. Has Cecilia become lonely because James is out enjoying his theatricals? Has she turned to Stephen Embley for a bit of comfort and companionship? Alternatively, has Embley, who appears to be a nefarious character, taken the chance while James is out for the evening to try to seduce Cecilia, the daughter of the Vicar of Blackburn, only for James to blame her and say that, as a clergyman's daughter, she should know much better, she should have known to resist temptation? Possible. Have James and Cecilia started to argue because he's just realised that the butler has been stealing his money and things, and he wants to know why Cecilia did nothing to stop it, and she has turned round and said, well, if you were in the house a bit more often and you weren't out watching plays all the time, maybe you would have noticed he was up to no good and he was a dodgy character, which I've been trying to tell you about all these years. James was, after all, quite a well-to-do man, and there are clues that suggest that he did live a very luxurious life, which might well have been a bit tempting for somebody like Stephen Embley. He certainly had a luxurious home. After his death in 1850, Sotheby and Wilkinson of the Strand in London, that is the forerunner of Sotheby's, the famous Sotheby's auction house, sold off what they described as miscellaneous antiquities, including beautiful Etruscan vases, Phoenician ware, antique glass, engraved stones set in fine gold as rings, and 3 marble busts of Voltaire, Lord Brougham, and the eminent poet Sir Thomas Campbell. That's quite an interesting display to have in your drawing room or any other room in the house. Is that the answer? Is that what has really tempted Stephen Embley? Perhaps he and Cecilia had nothing going on between them at all. Does the blame in fact lie solely with Stephen Embley? He is greedy, he is opportunistic, he is looking around at all this very, very nice furniture, very nice things, particularly things like rings, which one could easily pick up and hide in the pocket and maybe sell it. He could have taken his pick of anything sold at that auction, and he could have made quite a bit of money selling it on. Maybe greed is the answer to the puzzle there. Whatever the real story, whatever was going on, I think investigating these little details, these little stories that you find in the newspaper, do definitely give a lot of weight to the argument that you really should look beyond the census records. You can find out so much more about people by looking at the resources, and I encourage you to do it. It makes names into real people with real experiences, and you get a much better sense of how they existed and what they experienced, I think. And in keeping with that, in the third and final part of this mini-series, I am going to be exploring the life of James's wider family. He had brothers and sisters too, and I think that they're going to be quite interesting to explore. So that will be kept for part 3. And in the meantime, thank you for listening. I hope this has been enjoyable and maybe it's given you a few more insight into what is lurking in Clitheroe's interesting past.